Hello, I'm Tree and this is Stitches TV. Because in our last video we ran out of time and I couldn't show you how to do this really easy, very easy. Simple placket with cuff. I did promise that I would do a tutorial on it. So today we're going to make a very simple placket and cuff. So this is the shirt that we made in the previous video, and I only completed one sleeve cuff because I thought I'd save one for a video. So you begin by going to the back of the sleeve. So I have to make sure, it's really important that we put our sleeve to the back. So you can't get that mixed up. So this is the front of my blouse, so I'm going to flop it over. So I'm now at the back of my sleeve. I'm going to cut just on the back side of the sleeve, that's very important, somewhere around the middle area. Now because I've already done one, I have to make sure it's exactly the same, or more or less, the same length as the other one. So I've measured it out and it finished about there. So look, see how I've only cut through one layer, and this is the back of my sleeve. Now in our video of how to do the pussy bow blouse, I spoke about how you had to cut a strip of basically bias binding. You make a strip of bias binding, but maybe a little bit wider, because that then forms the placket, the easy placket. So I've created a strip that is maybe a bit less than 2 inches wide, and the length of it I've made longer than I need it to be for my slit. It's a good idea to completely prep this strip cut on the cross in advance, because it makes it a lot easier to sew. So I folded in a good seam allowance on both sides, and then I folded it again. See how it really is just like a strip of bias binding. Now obviously the other thing you need is a piece that's going to become your cuff. So it will become this part of the sleeve. So you cut that to whatever measurement you feel is good enough, but whatever you do, you need to allow enough for an overlap where you add your buttonhole and button. Then make it as wide as you want it to be, but your width that you cut it, you have to make that double, because your cuff folds over like that. So did I say, I'm sorry, you must put interfacing, iron-on interfacing onto your cuff. Okay, just to give it a bit of body. So once your pieces are all cut out, you're ready to do the first bit, which is to attach this bias binding around your opening. So I'll begin by opening out the bias binding, and look, do you see how we're stitching it on the wrong side first? That's so we end up with a definitely nice right side. So where we've pre-pressed it, we're going to stitch down that line. Now I'm leaving a little overhang just to be on the safe side. I'm going to align the needle with the line of my pressed line. Now to begin with, just stitch straight down that line. So remember, this is on the cross and this isn't. So you are going to get a slightly different movement with the fabric. So we're just going to sew straight down for now. But as we get very close to the end of our cut, we're going to try to pretend that it isn't a kind of V shape. We're going to try and pretend that it's actually a straight line. And the way in which we do that is that we make sure that we end up sewing close to that line, but at the same time as sewing in the well of our pressed line. So I'm going to align that pressed line with very close, but not up to, because otherwise it will slip off, our slit. So can you see that I'm still like, you know, I don't know, half an inch, no, not half an inch, quarter of an inch or half a centimetre away from the edge of my bias binding, but I'm really close to the tip of the slit, which you're not going to be able to see because I can't see either. So I'm just going to go carefully over there, very carefully, squidging it all out the way. But when I come round the other side, I can go back to doing the same. Whoops, she says. Seam allowance. So let's have a look. So that's what we've just done. So you wouldn't be aware, would you, that we'd actually placed that on a shape that was a slit. So if I show the other side, you can see how we cheated it. So there is the slit, and I very carefully came close to it and then carried on down the other side. So I don't want you to trim anything off yet. I just want you to get ready for sewing it onto the right side. So when I sew it on the right side, I'm turning my work around, so I'm now beginning at the other end. So, because it's all pre-pressed, it's going to be fine for me to start sewing on this other side. Now, if I was doing this with a complete beginner, I would get you to put a bit of bonder web in there, bond it in place, and then sew it, because that way nothing will move. So I just want to be very close to the edge, but I mustn't go over the edge. I'm lining everything up, and I'm not going to go backwards and forwards. Now your tricky bit is just this bit here again. You've just got to make sure you capture everything, but don't create a pleat. So I'll push in all those frayed bits. So that's what we have. It's all nicely pressed, and I trimmed off the excess bits because remember we cut it longer. So then what you need to do when you're still at the ironing board, I really recommend that you fold it in half and then press where the center is, because what we're going to do now is we're just going to do a few stitches that go from the edge back to the slit. Okay, that way. So you're working from the fold of your bias binding coming back, because you want to create that little V effect. So I'm starting at the fold, and I'll get my hand out the way, which is difficult. I'm just going to go forward a couple of stitches and then back, and I'm going to make sure I finish exactly at the edge of the bias binding. So it's only a little bit. Look, all I've done is that there. So I'll give that a press as well. So once you've put iron-on interfacing onto your cuff, I want you to press it in half in the way that it's going to be when it's actually done. But then, if we can just fold it inside out, and you're going to stitch up one side and stitch up the other side with a small seam allowance. So you'll end up with this. You probably should mitre the corners. My fabric isn't really very thick. And then turn it the right way round. Make sure your corners are good. And then give it a good press. So going back to the placket, you know when I said give it a good press, you know, press out that V bit, you press it so that it acts almost like a facing, like this. So I can hardly even see the bias binding inside. And you press it the way so that it's going towards the back, which will be towards your sleeve seam. And then what we need to do, we're going to do this bit. So let me get the other. So this is the finished sleeve. Okay, that's that plackety bit where I said press it like that. Now what we need to do is we need to see how our cuff fits on the sleeve, because it's not going to fit perfectly, because we're going to be creating pleats to make it fit, and also because we want that as a look. Now I haven't got any pleats at the back section. I've only got it as it comes around from the front going round to the back. Now whatever you do on one side, you've obviously got to do on the other side. So you decide what you want to do and then stick to it for both sleeves. Right, I'm going to start measuring out my sleeve now. So I'm going to start at this bit here, the placket, where I've folded it back, yeah? So that one's pressed in the position to fold back. Now also, the way that I'm attaching my cuff is I'm going to stitch it onto the back side first and then bring it round to the right side. So fold back that little bit of bias binding that forms the placket, and then put something there to hold it in place. So we're just sizing it up now. So I've done some rough pleats that I think are in the right positions, and then I'm getting a load of clips, but you can use pins or clips or whatever you want. And I'm testing out the size of it. So it might fit perfectly now, it might not. Wow, oh, that's amazing, it fits perfectly. So remember, the only reason it fits perfectly is because I started preparing the pleats the same as on the other side. So when you're happy with how it's fitting, I'm just going to make sure the pins are gone all the way through. Okay, so when you're happy with how it's fitting, I recommend sewing inside the cuff. Yeah, does that make sense? So do whatever seam allowance you want. I'm doing a centimetre seam allowance because that's what I did on the other side. Right, so I'm starting up on this end. So remember, only one of those is folded back, yeah? So it's only one of them. So where we begin sewing is right up to the edge of our cuff. And I'm not going to go backwards and forwards. And then I'm just going to slowly start stitching the cuff to the sleeve, making sure that these pleats don't become twisted, yeah? And then for me, I'm finishing on the side where my placket's folded back. But got to make sure that it all fits. So remember, we're inside the sleeve because then we're going to press back the other side of the cuff so that we see the good side for sure. So I want you to go away now. Well, not go away. I want you to go to the ironing board, and you've got to press all of this down and then fold back the same seam allowance on your cuff and put a few pins there so it's ready for you to top stitch. You can put a bit of Bonder web in there, very thin if you want. So I'll show you what I've done. I've pressed everything inside, and then I pressed back the seam allowance, so everything's all ready for me to sew. Now, using Bonder web there, cut very thinly, really, it makes it so much easier. So we're just going to do a little top stitch along there. So just so you know, doing that first bit there, it wasn't enjoying it, even though I have cut away the excess. So I changed the needle and it was much happier. I don't necessarily think it's easier attaching it the wrong way round first. So you do it whichever way you want, but then we're just stitching close to the edge but not over the edge, making sure that everything is lovely and flat, and just making our way to the other end of the cuff. So that is your cuff complete. That's the bit where we folded it back so that it lays nicely when we do the buttonhole there. So it's as easy as this. Right, I'm doing it with one hand. Anyway, if you do quite like this blouse that I'm doing the cuffs on, go and have a look at our pussy bow blouse sewing tutorial on Stitch This TV. I'll put a link in the description below. Thank you, bye.